I'm going to take this off. Okay, I'm live. It's been a minute, y'all. Close this. I'm going to wait a second to let people come in. Oh, there's already 3 people. You all know the drill, whoever's in here. You have to announce yourself because you're anonymous and I'm not, which is a power dynamic. But yeah, if you want to say hi in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're, oh, now there's only one. Okay. Hi, Noor. Yeah, so I'm going to wait for people to come, but it feels really good. We're going to be doing our cosmic YouTube Wednesday lives from now until the end of season 2, which it's so wild that we are somehow closing season 2 in mid-May, which is upon us. So I wanted to make sure that we had this touch point. Again, I really enjoy these Wednesday lives because hopefully the vibe feels familial and formal, informal. You can drop in, and I know my East Coasters, it's around 8 p.m. EST. It's 5 p.m. over here. And shout out to everyone who's been DMing me like, Issa, where are the YouTube Wednesdays? It really helps me and just motivates me to do them because obviously Wednesday at 5 after a day of client work and podcasting can sometimes be hard to stay coherent. But it's also a beautiful Libra full moon. So it felt like the perfect, and it's April 1st. So it just felt like a really important checkpoint. Yay, I see someone else is here. Peace. If you all want to introduce yourselves, no pressure, but if you want to say your name and how you're feeling today and where you're joining from, I love all of that. I thought actually before diving into the astrology of the moment, I haven't been online with you all in quite some time, and we just went through a month. So I wanted to just take a second and check in around that. We have this month as many planets in Aries as were just in Pisces. And I felt like all of that water felt like a lot. And I was in New York, some of you may know, for around 4.5 weeks in February. As a reminder, I'm a Taurus rising. So that is Aquarius season for me, lighting up my 10th. And I had the great pleasure of doing a live show, which I've posted a little bit about with India Moore at the SiriusXM Fishbowl studio, which is very intimate in New York. And I was there right when Mercury started its shadow retrograde in Pisces. And for those of you who need a refresher, Mercury doesn't like to be in Pisces. It is in detriment in Pisces. So even when it's direct, it is under-resourced. And that was when we started seeing all of the shenanigans with travel, delays, weather events. And I experienced all of that, as Nora can attest. We had 2 blizzards, record cold temperatures, all of the things. And because it's an immutable water sign, I also have to say it felt really, it felt really resourcing the way that going with the flow and finding humor and leaning on community, because Pisces lights up my 11th house of friendship, was definitely the wayfinder. So shout out all my friends and family and my sister and my mom who also was there, and my amazing producer Nora who's in the chat, for making me feel like we can truly get through anything as a team and with our own kind of resourcing when we need it. And that said, I really don't think we should do On Air Festival, which is the podcast festival, in the middle of February in New York City during the winter, because for those of you who went, it was incredible. But also, yeah, it's, if you're going to put that much like money and energy in creating such a magical event, the last thing you want is for folks not to be able to come because of weather. So Pisces season was really interesting. I'm very curious to hear how it was for all of you. I felt like there was so many close friends of mine going through a really difficult time when I came back, which was still when all of the planets were in Pisces, because Pisces is really that sign attuned to collective suffering. We had the war in Iran really like ramping up, and just a lot of people going through loss. And 2 of my closest friends just recently, right when Aries season came and the equinox gave birth, But it was that period right before you're gonna do something really some of the hardest thing you're ever gonna do, which is give birth, that waiting period where you just feel like the heaviness and the gravity and the anticipation of doing something quite difficult and magical. So it just felt like this point, this precipice threshold point that felt really um like a slog, like being waterlogged. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that was March, and then we had the vernal equinox, which I hope was lovely for people. And we had that moon, that Pisces moon, that kind of moment of release right before the resetting of the zodiac in Aries, 0 degrees Aries. And now we're in April. I think the thing that is the headline news for me and should be for all of us is that Venus has been in detriment in Aries for quite some time. And just on March 30th, ingressed or moved into Taurus, where it is properly resourced. And so now, hopefully, our connections, our relationships, all Venusian significations, which also include self worth and connection and kind of adornment and beauty and really enjoyment, should come with a bit more ease. I think also just moving from fire to earth is really helpful right now because we're going to have so much fire and air that I think that groundedness can really anchor us at this time. Also, I think something that I really want to highlight for people is that Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is very willful, and Venus is receptive yin energy, right? So I want you to think about how you're showing up in your life, period, in your relationship to yourself, to your work, to your relationships, to your friendships, and just doing like taking, I always say this in my client work, but taking inventory of your energy, right? Because I want you to take this Venus and Taurus as a time to give yourself permission to be more receptive. And as an Aries moon, that is difficult for me. There's something I always want to fight for, whether it's love or something as small as like bookings for work, for my podcast. And I think I always use Venus and Taurus as a time to be more receptive and allow myself, if you think of the tarot card, the Queen of Pentacles, one of my favorite tarot card readers calls her the Queen of Velvet Waiting. And she's seated as the Empress is in the tarot in her garden of abundance that she self generates. And there's a certain peacefulness and an acceptance, a deep acceptance of what is. And if you haven't already, this week we have a Taurus sun and moon, the just the lovely Laraji, who's 82 years old, and yet he's also timeless and eternal. And we talk a lot about the Venusian principle since he's both his luminaries are in Taurus. And I think it would be a great companion to usher in this Venus and Taurus in a quite difficult month where all of the planets are going to be making some difficult conjunctions in Aries. I think that, to be quite frank, I feel like Venus and Taurus is going to be one of the only places of joy and support this month. So get familiar with where Taurus falls in your chart. If you have a question about that, just tell me your ascendant in the chat and I can let you know where Taurus, the symbolic arena of life, that will be carrying you a little bit this month. And again, one of the things about astrology that's helpful is when we learn our chart and we orient it and we, participate in transits, we create a conscious awareness of what I like to call the celestial conditions available to us, which is wonderful because when we have that conscious awareness of what's available, we use our free will and we mobilize it and we engage with it in a way that we might not if we weren't aware of, where does Taurus fall in my chart? What does Venus signify? How can I kind of, experiment and participate in these transits in a way that's more awake? Because again, as you know, I always talk about this relationship between free will and the cosmos, and that it's this dynamic conversation. And so when we know where these things fall in our chart, rather than feel, because we're going to be talking about some difficult things this month, rather than feel victimized or feel preemptively afraid and anxious, which astrology sometimes does engender and cultivate in us when we talk about transits, which is why I'm always a little bit hesitant. And even with my client work, it gets difficult when we're talking about solar returns because it gets a bit predictive. And I think when we live in the future and we remove ourselves from the present, it feels like there's this impending event that is happening to us and we relinquish our agency and power and we feel like we're just anticipating something, whether it's good news or bad news in either direction. And what I felt so deeply inspired by the conversation with Laraji is this really important reminder of dropping within, right? Taurus is an earth sign. It's the sensualist second sign of the zodiac. Gemini hasn't entered the picture yet, so we don't have cognition and awareness and language. We just have the wisdom of our body and the wisdom the body holds. And through dropping into our bodies, we feel more connected to the eternal now, or that kind of timeless field, that astral field that he talks about, that is really, really hard to understand and apprehend through language and cognition because it's more of a somatic experience. But I think that's going to be instrumental this month because Aries is fast. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's fire. It's ruled by Mars, which is the planet of war and aggression and will. And what better medicine than Taurus, than Venus and Taurus, when you find yourself feeling that inner friction or that inner heat, or when, let's take the example of work or something that's out of our control a bit, right? Because with work, like I can speak to my podcast, we have to work at a certain pace to meet the demands of the show deadlines, which are really important for us to stay on track with. So sometimes we have to work faster, more creatively. We have to be resourceful. We have to make quick group decisions. That's a little preview of April, right? There's going to be this kind of Mars Saturn conjunction energy. Mars is really juiced up and resourced in Aries. So it's kind of winning over Saturn in Aries. It's more resource. So we're going to have that engine and then the brakes are going to get put on it. And so that creates that heat and that friction. It's that hurry up and wait energy where either two scenarios are possible. One, you feel ready to move on something, and it feels like I was just talking about to someone in Uruguay. We have the national soccer team, and you get to see them do drills on the Rambla, and they do these drills, soccer drills in the sand and in water, and it adds that level of resistance to your training. And Saturn adds that level of resistance to our training, right? And that's actually a really appropriate metaphor because Aries is the athlete, the warrior. And so we have that additional Saturnian resistance to the place that we want to go, right? That Aries energy. Conversely, sometimes Mars Saturn conjunctions can also look like having to go fast when things are not properly set up. And I am not trying to cast any spells of bad luck for myself, but I relate to that with the show or with everything I do where there is a momentum that I have to meet. And sometimes the details and the bookings or certain things aren't, falling in place in the way that would be ideal, but the train is already moving. And so you have to figure it out. So I think that that's kind of a headline, I don't know, just kind of overview of April where there's going to be these moments where it feels like there's a hurry up and wait dynamic in your life, where it feels like you're training with extra resistance. And then there's going to be other periods of life where it feels like things are moving super fast. And even if you wanted to slow them down, you can't, right? And so, how do we access that Venus and Taurus in those moments, which is going to be making a really nice relationship to Jupiter and Cancer? And so wherever Cancer is, it's going to be in a mutual aid with Taurus. So again, if you want to put your ascendant, I can tell you where that's happening. For me, Cancer's in my third house of this communication, transmission, exchange, the neighborhood. Taurus is my first house. It's my physical body, but it's my life direction and my sense of self identity, my me. And so I'm going to be using that very, very with a lot of discernment and intention. This month. So being clear and kind in my communication as a way to create boundaries around how I want to be treated. Remember, self-worth and self-value is very associated with Taurus. The other thing that's really important is that this full moon in Libra, Libra is the other sign ruled by Venus. So Venus rules today's full moon in Libra. It's the first full moon after the equinox. It is sitting in a square to Jupiter in Cancer, and it is opposing in a kind of large orb. So I wouldn't say it's like super applying to Saturn and Aries. So the square to Jupiter can sometimes increase the volume of our emotions, right? Because lunar events are more emotional. And in Libra, they deal with Libran significations of relationships, communication, justice, balance. So it is a good time to evaluate. And full moons represent a culmination point, right? So it is a great time to think about relationships in your life, whether they're at work or romantically, creatively. The biggest relationship we have is the one with ourselves, right? So thinking about the balance of power, the balance of give and take, hopefully not in a tit for tat way, but it's a good time to take inventory of reciprocity dynamics. I've definitely been doing that, and I didn't even remember it was going to be a full moon in Libra, but I think because Venus has moved into Taurus, I've been thinking a lot about how to move out of the kind of Aries way of approaching relationships to the Taurian way, which is a lot more about cultivating trust, patience. And there's a certain inborn self worth and self value that Taurus emanates, whereas Aries can feel like it has to overfunction and prove and speed up timelines. And fundamentally, Aries, and I can speak to this as an Aries moon, sometimes we use speed as a defense mechanism because we want people that we like to prove their desire for us, right? Mars. We want proof of desire in order to believe it. And sometimes we sabotage by speeding timelines up out of like a naive impatience that comes from being so passionate and so urgent. But Venus, trusts a little bit more than Aries, and it can be a little bit more patient in the timeline of how things unfold. And so with Venus now in Taurus, I think ruling this full moon in Libra, the other Venus sign, I think as we evaluate our relationships, it's also nice to remember just, yeah, to think about our defense mechanisms with a little bit more awareness. Some people are on the inert end of things, and some people are on the Aries end of things where they're always speeding things up and throwing themselves at life. And another thing that Aries likes to do is to prove itself. It loves a challenge romantically or in relationships. So sometimes it can actually be attracted not necessarily to rejection, but to something difficult or complicated. So I think taking inventory of those patterns, of those defense mechanisms, and being really honest, I think is helpful. First time in an Aries moon also, and Venus in Taurus. Wow. That's a beautiful balance because I also have my Venus is in Scorpio in detriment. So having those two Mars ruled signs in the more receptive places of the moon and Venus has been a lifelong journey and it will continue to be a journey. But you have that beautiful balance of the Mars ruled moon thing, though. I'm sure you can resonate and relate where it's like there is still this place of energy and proving and this martial kind of spirit in the moon in our emotions that leads with urgency. And that Venus in Taurus allows you to pull back and trust that the things that are meant for you are aligned, and whatever falls away, you will be able to grieve and move on. And that grief part is what I wanted to talk about because so we have this moon in Libra, this full moon in Libra, squaring Jupiter in Cancer, opposing Saturn in Aries, and we're building up to Friday where Venus that just moved into Taurus is starting to build up to a square to Pluto in Aquarius, the other fixed sign. So we have the cardinal cross, we have the fixed cross and the mutable cross. And the fixed signs, Taurus, Scorpio, its sister sign, and Aquarius and Leo, right? I actually haven't done a live since we had our first eclipse across the Aquarius and Leo axis. It was the same day as the Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the fire horse. We had the first eclipse in Aquarius. So Pluto is stationed in Aquarius. Remember, Pluto transits are long and slow, and they arrive with force. So anyone with significant fixed placements in their personal planets or outer planets are going to be experience oppositions, conjunctions, and squares. So for those of us with a lot of Scorpio and Taurus, we will experience squares to Pluto. With those of us with Leo, you're going to experience oppositions, and those with Aquarius, you'll experience conjunctions to Pluto. Now, what is Pluto? Pluto is one of the three planets that was discovered much later. That's why it does not show up in the traditional rulership system. If you get a reading by me or most astrologers in the Hellenistic tradition or older traditions, we don't use those modern planets in our rulership system. So Scorpio shares the ruler in the pre-modern system or in the ancient system with Aries, which is Mars. Pluto gets discovered later with Neptune and Uranus. Pluto kind of represents that archetype of the underworld, of the unconscious drives. It's actually a really important archetype that fleshes out Scorpio really well, I think, because Mars is more conscious, cognitive energy, and Pluto is the hidden, and it's the hidden drives And I think it really helps explain. A lot of times people talk about the magnetism of Scorpios, but that magnetism can also create a kind of repellent for people, because it's an energetic intensity that feels like it's probing at you even when it's quiet. So even if a Scorpio isn't asking you a question, with its presence or its eye contact, you can feel investigated. And it's that Scorpio X-ray vision that feels quite plutonic, right? So Pluto brings up and brings us in contact with these unconscious patterns and dynamics that are subterranean, that are sometimes very difficult to talk about in relationships, precisely because they're hard to define and grasp, right? So I'm sure you've all been in relationships, romantically or psychologically intense ones, where it's hard to have the conversation because it feels like an energetic exchange. So when you name the dynamic, it feels like a risk because you don't know if you're going to name something the other person's going to actually be willing to admit. That's Pluto, right? So Pluto squaring Venus can be exactly that dynamic. It brings up the psychological dimensions of power dynamics in relationships. Again, to give an example, as a Taurus rising, Taurus sits on my first house, Aquarius sits at my 10th house. The 10th house deals with my public reputation, my roles, my work, my calling. So sometimes with the Venus Pluto square with the first and 10th, there can be something to manage around my own kind of self actualization and desire. I also, my body and my physical self, my avatar, I was gonna say my avatar, but this is just me. Myself is part of my work, right? Like right now, I'm visible to you. I don't have like an MF Doom kind of thing happening right now. It's just me. And so sometimes those squares produce tension. There could be something that happens at work or publicly that feels like it's producing tension with how I want to be perceived, right? So those tension points, it's really helpful to know what the house placement is of Taurus and Aquarius to understand the nuance of how it might show up for you. And Taurus rising also, oh my goodness. You have such a juicy chart. So you have an Aries moon and I'm a Taurus rising as well. So for you, this is the same, it's the same thing where like some theme related to your self-identity, your physical body, and your public roles, your work, what you want to be known for is going to be put in some type of conversation, right? And again, Pluto sometimes isn't literal. Sometimes it's not like we're going to get publicly embarrassed on Friday. It doesn't have to be that literal. It can just be there's some unconscious stuff that's coming up and surfacing for us to look at. For Scorpio risings, this is going to be happening in their house of committed relationships. So sometimes these squares are actually pretty quiet internal events where it's more just like feeling an internal tension. Maybe I also think squares sometimes show up as anxiety. Like, am I, a lot of Taurus risings with Pluto in our 10th, a lot of Taurus risings I know left a job or transforming their work or questioning existentially what they want to be known for, where they want to mobilize their purpose and passion. So sometimes these are like these bigger existential questions that are in the background, they're more ambient. And then depending on the degree and how exact it is to your placements natally, sometimes it's very loud, right? So it's always good to look up the degrees and just kind of note if it's like, 28-degree Taurus rising and that's your exact degree ascendant, it might be pretty literal for you. And then if it's not, yes, I love it. In it now, amazing. Oh, it's so fun. I love these. I'm so glad I'm back. Thank you so much for in the chat. It always makes it more fun for me. Um, so yeah, and something that's interesting for Taurus risings is like we're entering this kind of interesting transition period where we went from this packed Pisces transit season, lighting up our friendship and community and this kind of buzzy time to now Aries, which is our 12th house. And it's the season right before our ascendant gets lit up. And so it's a time of actually going behind the scenes to rest. And if you're dealing with any endings, any breakups or any big decisions, or you're kind of thinking about them, it's a time to really go within, go into the kind of Jungian inner depths. And it's so funny how I'm always talking about the inner depths, but I'm very Scorpio. But it's a time of quiet and spiritual surrender. And now I always eye roll because everyone's talking about rest. And I'm sure there's so many mothers and parents who are like, what is that? That's such a luxury. I feel you. As a person who does not have children, I do feel like I can rest a lot more than besties with new children, new babies. But yeah, it's a time of also like symbolic rest. So it can be like quite literally getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep every day, but it can also look like daydreaming and just embracing this entire month, almost 2/3 of the month, where most of the planets will be lighting up your 12th house as a time to not feel like you need to set goals or be more martial, but actually a time to be introspective and almost to it, this is interesting. I've been thinking a lot about how a lot of cultures have a reverence for emptiness, like the state of emptying out or zoning in. And as I've gotten older, really think it's very important for us to kind of embrace states of emptiness where we're not just processing all the time. I think with therapy and even astrology and all these modalities becoming quite popular, there's such an emphasis on the verbal and the processing and language. And I really think this episode that I just did with Laraji, Laraji and I both talk a lot about how there's so many important dimensions of somatic experiences that are not languageable, that are also equally, if not more important, states to protect and experience. Whether that's breathing, Laraji facilitates a lot of laughter meditations that you can look up. I really highly recommend them. You can also just put on a Laraji live mix on YouTube and just zone in. I actually prefer saying zoning in to zoning out because I think the 12th house is actually about kind of understanding that we can't keep seeking information and feedback from our external environment, that when we're constantly avoiding the internal, we forget how rich our internal world already is. I think about ChatGPT and AI as another kind of force against cultivating our intuition. And I'm someone who has a great insatiable appetite to learn. I'm always reading. I have so many books all around me, and I am constantly challenging myself to put the book down, to put it away, and to remember that there's already so much that I've accumulated to mine, whether it's for my script or for my clients, and to trust my own wisdom and knowledge, not from a place of arrogance or hubris, but actually from a place of humility, and to say, there's only so much that one can process and know. Why don't you just, create a boundary and then trust yourself? And that's again that Aries, Venus, and Taurus balance. So that's just an example for Taurus risings out there that this is going to be a preparatory month for us to prepare ourselves for this ascendant period where all the planets will slowly start to move into Taurus, activating our first house. And it will be a time of increased visibility and momentum. When I say visibility, I just mean like literally going from behind the scenes into a place of feeling ready to be witnessed. And I actually feel like that cycle is very universal for all of us. Like there's moments where it feels really good to not be witnessed. I've actually been this is a little bit of a tangent, but I've been thinking also about scalability and how everyone assumes, including ourselves, that the goal should always be more. I need to be more famous. I need to be more known. I need this to be a bigger project. I need more people. I need more views, more likes, right? So there's always assumption that more is better. And I think astrology has helped me really question that and be like, there are important periods to check in. And maybe the answer is that you're feeling deeply satisfied with a certain scale, or that if you were really honest with yourself, you're actually not in a moment of growth. You're in a moment of trying to refine and hone something before you scale it. Right. So I've been thinking a lot about just pausing long enough to answer the question sincerely for yourself because people mean really well and they're always going to push that on you and kind of assume that that's just this kind of blank, good advice of like, of course you should date and you should want more and what is your success? And I think it's easy to kind of autopilot Aries that out. And, on this, I'm just saying this to prepare us for April, where it's like constantly doing more and taking on more and optimizing more. And it's not always the best route and it's not always the route that you actually want and it's definitely not the route that you're always ready for, right? And I always remind people that we're getting really strange with Jupiter and how we're talking about Jupiter, but remember Jupiter, especially for all of you cardinal placements, Cancer, Cap, Libra, and Aries risings. I've gotten so many clients saying, I thought Jupiter and Cancer was going to be really good for me. And like, I'm not really feeling the blessings or expansion. I'm like, listen, Jupiter is going to stretch you. It's an outer planet, just like Uranus, just like Saturn. And Jupiter doesn't always feel good, right? Because it amplifies and magnifies whatever it touches. So let's take Cap risings with Cancer, Jupiter and Cancer transiting your seventh. Sometimes that transit is just magnifying all of the feelings that you're feeling about seventh house things. So if you're feeling defeated, or if you're feeling like you're always attracting a certain emotionally unavailable pattern in relationships, it might just amplify that. Right. So sometimes these planets are a bit more neutral than modern astrologers talk about them, where you see these TikTok influence astrologers promising all types of things to different rising signs, which I would never do because that's not necessarily what the function of the planet is. And so that just reminded me of Sagittarius and Pisces and Aries, like all of these placements that are highly optimistic and their orientation is towards more, right? Jupiter is the planet of more, of pushing the boundary, of wanting it to go big or go home. So sometimes the part of us that is Jupiter is, always going to say yes. And then the other part of us where Saturn lives, that's not just a party pooper. Saturn is not just a party pooper. Saturn is also looking out for us and is saying, are you even resourced to scale? Are you even up for that? Is that even something you want? Right. So finding that balance between Jupiter and Saturn and those parts of ourselves that, sometimes we want more. What's that phrase? I'm so freaking hilariously bad at like idioms and things, but I love when people are really good at them. I'm like, damn, you sound so great. Bite more off than you can chew, whatever that is. So that's just a little nugget. And again, it carries over into this theme of, and I do have the dates here. Remember with astrology, everything's like cooking. It's Astrology is both very precise, and there's also these kind of, we have the pre shadow of Mercury retrograde, then the actual retrograde, then the post shadow, right? So things are not exacting to the day. So we have the peak of the Mars Neptune conjunction on the 12th of April, the peak of the Mars Saturn conjunction on the 19th, but we're building up to those narratives and those peak points. In the same way that the full moon in Libra today, we don't have Venus, its ruler, squaring Pluto today, but it's building there and it peaks on Friday and it's Wednesday. So it's right around the corner. So I say that because sometimes we're feeling this gradient emotionally and we're intuiting a transit we don't know is happening because we're simply in tune and we're conscious and awake to our emotions and we're feeling the Mars Saturn conjunction building in that part of our life, even though if we're not aware that it's happening. And so I just want to affirm that a lot of times people actually can already be like, oh, that checks out. I've been feeling that. So, yes, we have this Mars Neptune conjunction preceding Mars Saturn. Both Neptune and Saturn are in close degrees in Aries. Mars Neptune is a bit strange. Neptune is oftentimes where we are deceived or deceiving ourselves. It's where structures dissolve. And Mars, again, that planet of drives, of aggression, go getter energy, the engine. And so it's a bit strange. There might be things that you're going after that you need to take a better look at. There might be, subtle or complex deceptions with Mars related things. There could be opportunities, attractions, conflicts where the information is not complete or where you're misdirecting anger at someone that may or may not actually deserve it. Right. So I really want us to counterintuitively apply discernment and kind of almost slow ourselves down when we feel extremely heated. When we feel, and my Aries moons, you get it, because like our moon is our physical body. I always remind people of that. It's not just kind of this nebulous emotional body. It represents your physical body. So when you have an Aries moon, there can be this like buildup of impatience, this explosion point of expression, and then like all Aries placements, once you've expressed yourself, you kind of feel way better and renewed and you move on. Aries is one of the signs that holds the least grudges. It does the least calculus. It's very forgiving in that way, but it's like a child. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's very impulsive and instinctual. I love that after someone who's been around so many lunar and Saturnian people who have such a hard time saying the thing. I have so much gratitude that I have an Aries moon because I really feel in the presence of someone who's Saturnian. There's so much editing, self-editing, there's so much censorship, there's so much fear and anxiety. I don't think we talk about Saturn as fear and anxiety enough. I think people are so intimidated by Saturn as this stern parent, and we forget that Saturn's also a scared child. And sometimes when you're intimidated by someone, it's helpful to remember that they're also scared. They could just put up a really convincing front, and you might be a person who can put up a really convincing front. And that doesn't always serve you because then people won't check on you. They won't ask further questions. They won't try and break the facade because it's frankly too convincing. Right. So, as someone who has an Aries moon, I'm grateful for it all the time because I reach a threshold where I can't be quiet and I have to embrace my inner child that is just going to say the hard thing and going to ask the question very directly. Aries is very direct energy. So don't be afraid to express, don't be afraid to name, don't be afraid to initiate and lead. Aries is a cardinal sign. Cardinal signs are the leadership signs. They catalyze, they lead. But check in. There's a way that we, especially those of us who are older, have learned to modulate emotion. That's such a skill, right? I'm sure you all know those people that no matter what age they are, they never take accountability for their emotional expression. There's always some convenient excuse why they had to express themselves in the way they did. Barring you have severe neurodivergence or mental health crisis, there should be some responsibility and accountability with modulating emotion based on context, right? So make sure you're not just going off half cocked at someone who doesn't deserve it because you're not being accountable to your own, emotional process, i.e., taking a walk, making sure you have at least 20 to 30 minutes if you're able bodied to exercise, if you have Aries placements. Like, hopefully, as adults, we all know the things we need to do to make sure we're regulated. And if you're one of those people that doesn't have, those privileges, then there's other things to put in place like accountability people, therapists, etc. But for the most part, those of us who are listening, we know the things we need to do before we have the conversation, before we show up to work. Like, we've all had those bosses. Oh, oh my gosh, we are twins. Wait, how did you find me? Because I'm so glad you did. We are twin souls. And you're a Gemini and I'm a Scorpio. And weirdly, Gemini and Scorpios, we have this thing with each other. Um, and I'm a really late degree Taurus rising. So, like, my inner joke with myself is that I'm almost a Gem rising because I'm so yappy and talkative. I'm definitely the most chatty Scorpio I've ever met because most Scorpios I know are very introverted. And I'm not, there's ways in which I'm a private person, but when you become public, you kind of have to forgo that. And I lost my train of thought, which is okay. But yeah, all I'm saying is embrace the Aries to a point, but modulate the emotional expression. Oh, what I was going to say is we all have, I'm sure, those bosses that did not take care of themselves. They were in leadership roles and they took it out on their team irresponsibly, right? So we never want to be that. I remember like leaving an old job and being like, wow, folks are not taking care of themselves and burnout is real, but that's also not an excuse to go AWOL on your staff when you're in a leadership position, right? I think the same thing is true for romantic or intimate relationships of all kinds, close friendships. How do we make sure we're not going towards avoidance, but we're also not confronting people in a way that doesn't really feel good or feel appropriate? Like, there's always a way to have a conversation sooner in a way that can be just like this. And if you wait too long to have it like this, then it's explosive. So that's my hope. And then with that Mars Neptune conjunction on the 12th, let's make sure that we're aiming. And this is now, we'll take it to a political space. I remember when I was 18 and I went to Oaxaca to learn from the Zapatistas, which was this Mexican and still is a Mexican liberation movement of a lot of indigenous folks. They were giving us, as this American delegation of leftists from LA and New York mostly, they were giving us their own opinion that it felt like the leftist movements in the US sometimes didn't know how to discern our enemy and who was our opponent. This is very Mars conjunct Neptune, right? So are we infighting? Are we misrecognizing the true enemy? How do we choreograph and align our analysis so that we can unite and be more effective and strategic, right? Because when we all have a different idea of who the enemy is, right? Which that's like a very villain hero story kind of way of putting it. Obviously, there's complexity. We know that there's, that's a kind of simplified way of saying it. But I think it's very resonant for those of you who are in movement space or have been in activist spaces or are just on the internet. Because in a comment section, you can see we're in this kind of Uranus and Gemini, which is the other headline that's going to happen this month. Uranus is going to fully transition out of Taurus into Gemini, where it is way more friendly and they are way more compatible than Uranus and the fixed Earth sign of Taurus. So that's good news. But I do feel like Uranus and Gemini is going to speed things up, technology, kind of this AI ification of everything. And I also think when I think of Uranus and Gemini, I think of this labyrinthic, Tower of Babel time that we're in, where we're discoursing our way through war, we're discoursing our way through all types of, intensifications, and language has become this kind of compulsion. Language and cognition and hot takes and going back and forth and misinformation and trying to understand what we're seeing and how to read it, right? So that discernment is going to become ever more important. And oh, my sister. Yeah, we are so immersed in imperialism. I don't think people can tell who is the villain, right? And it's interesting because I was reflecting that my trip to Oaxaca was when I was 18. And so the prediction or kind of the conversation that we were having then was almost ominous because it felt like it was just going to become more and more true of the challenge of building a cohesive left in the United States. And so it's only become more atomized and difficult to kind of cohere. And it's at the same time, it's like we're also there's an onslaught on our attention span. And so it's much harder. We can romanticize and wax poetic all that we want about the 60s and 70s and moments where, we were doing a lot more deep reading and studying together. But it's difficult now and we are in new conditions and we need to be, empathetic to these conditions and how they've affected us because they are strategic and they are doing a thing that they're designed to do, which is to weaken us. And that is the part that I like about Aries, which is the part of us that knows it's time to stand up and get to it, right? Especially after Pisces. Pisces to Aries is such an epic transition. We go from the non duality of Pisces. It's so beautiful to listen to the Raji episode. He has such amazing language to describe this kind of timeless collapsing of time. Pisces confronts us with the illusion of separation. It breaks our trance of separateness and it wakes us up to the eternal now, the fertile void that is Pisces. And it's also where we lose our way. So, any Pisces placements they find confusion quite generative. They thrive in boundarylessness and chasing the liminal edges. They can feel extremely claustrophobic in the 3D world. They don't necessarily yearn for categorization or labels. Pisces don't feel safe in the definable. And it's really funny because I don't have a lot of Pisces. I have my Jupiter in Pisces, but I am someone who loves films, like independent films with no concrete ending or moral takeaway. And throughout my life, I've taken like close friends to see these said films, and they've been like, I hated that film. And I really need the film to like end in a responsible, ethical place that makes me feel safe, i.e., there's some sort of like resolution or reconciliation at the end. And I always laugh because my family culture is so Pisces dominant. Like both my parents are Aquarius suns with all Pisces. My oldest sister's a Pisces sun. So we're just not a family that finds safety in conclusions. We are a family that are seekers and question askers, which is why all of us in some way are educators and artists, and we're people who illuminate, as James Baldwin says, the question the answer hides, right? So that's kind of our whole jam. So we go from this kind of mythic, etheric place of Pisces, and bam, we're back to the territory of Mars. The zodiac begins again, and we're a baby. And it's an important elemental change from water to fire. Fire also purifies and cleanses. Let's not forget that. But Aries is taking Pisces out of the fish, that are moving in this kind of delusional cycle that is disassociated from Earth. It's disassociated from, the worldly. And it doesn't mean that that disassociation is inherently avoidant or escapist. And I think that's actually a misread of Pisces because Pisces is somewhere. They're actually in the truest place, right? They're in that remembrance of source. And I've been thinking about the Pisces Aries continuum. And what I've been thinking about is Aries placements like myself are very susceptible to optimization because we, like Sagittarius, are always, and Capricorn, love self improvement. So we're always like, what can I do to improve myself? Right. We're like trying to constantly get better and better and better and better. And we're very susceptible to that. So I'm someone who catches myself talking a lot about the concept of becoming and transforming, which is very Scorpio of me as well. Scorpios are always trying to, die so that they can be reborn again. And a lot of Scorpios go through these very public deaths and rebirths. So a lot of Scorpio placements from like rappers like Sir to SZA, they go through these like full body transformations where they get like super fit. But if you talk to them, their fitness journey had nothing to do with their bodies. It was like the impetus of that was some sort of spiritual crisis or a loss in their life or a sobriety journey. And so the shell or the kind of avatar was a consequence of a more internal death and rebirth. So this kind of Scorpio Mars Aries energy of becoming and transforming, I'm realizing as I get older, becoming is actually a remembering. And this is the Aries Pisces connection, is that when we're becoming, we're actually remembering who we've always been. So like becoming and remembering are now this really interesting cycle that's been grounding me and anchoring me and it's holding me accountable when I get to Aries and I'm trying to get too many answers from the external world and too much external feedback. Oh, I know that I'll be worthy when everyone tells me I'm attractive or successful or desired, right? That's the Aries Scorpio trap at times. And then Pisces and Cancer kind of bring us back to this like dormant collective memory that remembers that our worth isn't tied to those things because it's tied to something much deeper. So the becoming remembering thing has been a game changer for me and it's helping me hold myself accountable when I'm like I need to max out. Aries is maximalist. And we're entering a time where that worries me because if we get too attached to our job or even honestly like our relationship or our titles, again, listen to Laraji because he talks about us and he tells us to take our titles off. And the reason that's important is because when we're going through these times of precarity and we're so attached to our identities in these very discrete ways. Oh, like I'm only important when my podcast is on air. I'm only important when I'm claimed in a relationship. I'm only important when I have a really nice apartment. We are so easy to be defeated because the minute those things go away, all of the variables and levers of control are out of our hands, we feel completely clueless and worthless. We don't have an identity outside of those material milestones, right? So that's very concerning, and we're all susceptible to that. So I think for me, my practice with astrology is deepening and deepening and deepening because I'm seeing how having a strong spiritual discipline and foundation strengthens our movements. So I moved away from political spaces because they were despiritualizing and they didn't provide and illuminate not answers, but frameworks that we need in our movements because we might not win. There's not certain clear wins and losses, right? As much as we want our language to trick us into believing that things are simple, they're not. So I found that political spaces didn't have the complexity in the symbolic systems or in the analysis, frankly, that we needed to meet the moment. And we need those complex, fluid systems and languages to enchant people, to incentivize people, to have people participate in a rich inner life that's not just about showing up and getting a job done. People have a lot of needs and our movements need to provide those conditions and context for people, right? People need to make music, they need to make love. There's that kind of there's that phrase that I always bring up, bread and roses. They're equally important. dignified living, and then our spirit needs to soar. We need art. Like none of these things are frivolous. And it's so frustrating when we undermine what we know we need. We don't need to undermine that. Venus is values. Venus is now resourced in Taurus. I want us to move from a place of our values, move from a place of feeling very aligned and very empowered with our values. Like we cannot we cannot negotiate our values anymore. Like we know what we value and we know what's valuable, and we can't subvert and undermine that so much because it gives people too many openings to negotiate what we know we don't want to negotiate. Like this is what it means to be human and alive and have a meaningful existence. Bread and roses. We need rent that we can afford. We need food we can afford. Everyone deserves housing that is safe and dignified. These are things that should not be politicized in the sense of like, "Oh, you're such a leftist." Like, that's such an illness in this country that that's even a label, frankly, that we even need to argue if people deserve housing and that that's some sort of polarizing stance. It's like we're so ill. But we also need art, and we need intimacy, and we need connection, and we need singing, and we need all of these things, right? And they don't have to come in the packages we were told they have to come to be legitimate. My sister and I are always talking about this. We can have physical touch and community arrangements that aren't monogamous, heterosexual, heteronormative love, but that doesn't matter what the actual combinations are because we still need it. We still need snuggles. We still need childcare. We still need singing and cooking. We still need all of those intangibles. And as an astrologer, and you can all imagine, everyone is always saying, coming for me and saying that astrology is nonsense, it's a pseudoscience. And, we talk about this in this episode this week too, around the relationship with the material and the metaphysical, and that human life and that human beings are sustained through the intangible as much as the material. And I feel like so many of my teachers and other artists are reflecting on me that I don't need to constantly defend this. This is just an obvious thing. I'm trying to keep up. I'm so curious about the US birth chart. I actually have the US birth chart. I'm a Pisces rising with a Capricorn stellium in the 11th house. An interview with a Pisces rising would support it. Oh, yes. I want you to go listen to the Bio Akomolafe episode from season 1. Um, I think it will really jive with you. And it's just like Bio and Laraji have the most poetic, incredible language that I've ever come across to describe Pisces. So that would be my recommendation for you. I'm so curious about the US birth chart. So obviously the US is a Cancer rising because one of the things about Cancer is that it bonds through creating these kind of familial attachments, right? And just like Scorpio, unlike Cancer, unlike Pisces, Cancer and Scorpio create more intimacy with a trusted few. And so Cancer creates this kind of like protective um space for the people that it wants to treat like family, which can be chosen family, obviously. But they're the protector. And a lot of times we put nationalism on the Cancer and Capricorn axis because Capricorn Saturn represents history and Cancer represents this kind of protectionism. So a lot of nation states are Cancer risings, and a lot of Cancer placements are very patriotic. Um, I have had a lot of heartbreaking moments with Cancers that I've dated who don't have very complicated politics around public safety, around the police, around nationalism, honestly, because at the end of the day, Cancers are like, that makes me feel safe. The police are important. I'm not trying to shit on Cancers, but I've had a lot of political disagreements with them, and it has really surprised me until I realized it makes sense. I'm like, "Oh, you guys are actually really about the kind of boundaries that you need to feel safe, and it is still a you thing." And I would say all cardinal signs need to be a little bit wary of that, about being very self-focused. And Cancer, you'd think wouldn't be self-focused. Yes, Nati, they have a lot of fear. And again, remember Saturn is fear, and it's the opposite sign of Cancer. There's a lot of fear. Scorpio has a lot of fear too. We have a lot of fear, but Scorpio is the fire sign of water signs because it's ruled by Mars like Aries. And Scorpio wants truth and it wants honesty and it wants reckoning. Now you have the Joe Bidens and the Hillary Clintons, and you have a lot of war hawk Scorpios, just like you have a lot of nationalist patriotic Cancers. That is I would argue that is a distorted representation, expression of something where it's allowing its fear to inform its politics. Now, the best expression of Cancer and Scorpio is to transmute that fear into a confrontation with truth to power, right? So that's why you have me as a Scorpio stellium who's like, no, we have to tell the truth and we have to bear the consequence of that truth. And we have to protect the least of these. That's Cancer at its best, right? We have to protect the least of these, not we have to protect me and mine, right? Now I'm catching up in the comments. Can you believe how blind I am, guys? And you know what? The reason sometimes I don't wear my glasses is because the more you wear your glasses, the blinder you get because you now have this dependency on them. Okay. I have had some of the exact conversations with Cancer. I appreciate the space you create. Oh, thank you so much. Can attest. Okay. Well, this is very therapeutic to hear because I have been having a lot of feelings about it as well. And I know that Scorpios are just as susceptible to some unfortunate fear-based behavior. And that's just we need to call it in ourselves and in our community right now because unfortunately, there's no space for fear to lead and to actually be the lever upon which we move. We are all allowed to be afraid. That is that we can take that note from Aries and we can do things afraid and we can own that fear together to our loved ones and people we feel safe with. But it's not an excuse, and that's what I've told so many, I'm not going to pick on Cancers, but that's what I've told the Cancers that I love is like, I hear you and I'm going to hold space for your fear. I'm not going to hold space for that politics because it's harmful. And we need to take a note from Pisces. We need to widen the circumference of who we are compassionate towards, not in a heady way. Pisces don't feel heady. If you want to know what Pisces are like, read any of the diaries of Kurt Cobain. He was in so much physical pain from the empathy that he felt for his daughter and strangers that he didn't know. It was like he felt like an overwhelming embodied sense of empathy for the world itself. And a lot of Pisces, they're the animal sign. So they feel a similar empathy with non-human sentient beings. So I really want us to take a page from the Pisces of feeling as invested in people who are not my man and my daughter, like that. We have to leave that behind. You can generate a feeling from that truth and extend it outward as a politic, but to just be guarded and to be scared is not going to cut the mustard. Is that the phrase? Um, yeah, Pisces are the least heady. I love that. It's so funny because I'm interviewing one of my favorite MCs tomorrow who's a Cancer Pisces moon. And in every interview that I've been listening to him, he's like, I mean, I'm definitely not cerebral. And I was like, yeah, Pisces moon, Cancer sun, Sag Mars, like definitely not cerebral. Yes, they can articulate themselves in words, but I don't feel like, yeah, again, I just think there's so many signs in the zodiac that are not contributing verbally. We have Gemini, we have Virgo, we have signs that know how to wield language in a clear way for a certain purpose to transmit secrets, to transmit information. Libra, right? The diplomat, the one who knows how to make everyone feel heard and considered. And the opposite sign of Libra is Aries, the season we're in, and all the planets that are about to be in Aries. Aries is not contributing balance, and it's not necessarily interested in hearing what everyone has to say, right? Like if you've been part of any democratic process, it's definitely not efficient, right? And that's why Aries gets very impatient because I'm imagining my Aries moon sitting in the junta in Oaxaca, and it was like 80 people, community members, were going to speak their grievances. And we were there for 9 hours straight. And I was like, oh no, Like, this is inefficient and a waste of time, but it's not, right? But my Aries moon was struggling through it. So that's what I'm trying to that's the kind of alarm that I'm trying to sound for this month is that with so many planets stacked in Aries, it kind of represents that American rugged individualism, that fiction that we impose on the global world order. That's not just the United States, it's the global elite, which is very much a lot of other people outside of the US, right? It's those people in power in the 1%, who are looking out for themselves, very Aries. They're very me focused, right? So we also, on a personal level, need to watch out for that. But if you have a hard time mobilizing the ego and the self, which now we're in this like weird space where everyone just universally talks about an ego as if we don't need one, very dangerous. Don't partner with a person who talks about the ego like you don't need it. Um, that's weird. You need an ego. And so if you're someone who has a hard time, being embodied, self-actualizing, this might be a good month for you. Maybe it's time to activate some of that Aries, take responsibility. Remember that Aries helps you direct your life. We only have this life. We only have this body. You only have this moment. Very Aries. What do you want to do with that? There's not a lot of signs in the zodiac that have the courage and audacity that Aries does. Aries is like, "You're right. I don't have infinite time. I do philosophically and spiritually, but what decisions do I wanna make to align and to direct my life?" They're gonna take courage, there's gonna be loss, there's gonna be a certain self-honesty required, right? That's why I'm sounding that alarm around that Mars-Neptune conjunction where we can deceive ourselves and deceive other people. Right, but what is that clarity and that courage and that martial energy where we can cut the noise, do something difficult? Because as a not just as adults, but definitely as you get older, you're always choosing the grief, right? There's always a grief that you're choosing. Are you gonna stay in the relationship that you're not fulfilled in because it's safe, or are you gonna choose the grief of losing that relationship and having to reinvent yourself over a time because you're looking to actually live in alignment? Are you gonna leave the job and then be financially precarious for a little bit, or are you gonna stay in the job that at least you have a check coming in? As adults, we're always choosing a certain kind of grief, right? But that's a powerful choice that we don't wanna give up and surrender because we can handle that grief. Lean on your Scorpio Aries friends to remind you of that. We are built for that loss. That Venus square Pluto on Friday, that's that moment. And then, guys, after Venus square Pluto, Venus is smooth sailing up until the 24th of April. And then it changes signs into Gemini. But we have a pretty well resourced Venus all month long. So I really want us to tap into that Venus and Taurus. Wherever Taurus is in your chart, wherever Cancer is in your chart, those are going to be some resourcing, mutual aiding aspects. So those house placements and those signs, right? Venus and Taurus, Cancer and Jupiter, they're very related. Cancer and Taurus are both snuggly. They love food. They love luxuriating. They're very, very resourcing and generous to the people they love. They're more trusting. A healthy Cancer and a healthy Taurus are more trusting. So I want us to really rely on our lunar and our Venusian qualities. And we do not want to shame our Mars, but we want to make sure that our Mars is being expressed in a healthy way. And again, find those distributed arenas to express your Mars so that you're not going off half cocked at one target that might not be the right target. So channel that Oaxacan advice of know your opponent, know where you want to nudge against, where you want to agitate, and know where agitating is actually creating more harm and be accountable to it. Saturn and Aries. Saturn is the disciplinarian. It's the one that's going to make us take accountability. And Aries sometimes needs a Saturnian, as much as I don't want to admit it. Saturn and Aries kind of make sense to me. Like Saturn is like, yo, Aries, we gotta we gotta think about the consequence before we pop off, my friend. But then Aries is like, Saturn, you're so slow. You're too slow. Like, we gotta make decisions and it's gonna be imperfect and we gotta keep it pushing. if you listen to the Malik the Oracle episode I did, Malik talked about that when I was kind of being this grumpy millennial. And I was like, I don't know, Gen Z. Sometimes I don't know if y'all are even like saying anything researched or if you're just going off straight on impulse like that. And he said, we don't really have time anymore. Like, we need to move and it will be imperfect and we'll get better, but we need to be in motion as we get better. And I was like, I was humbled by that and I received that. So sometimes Aries needs to nudge Saturn. And remember, Mars wants to be in Aries. So out of the two malefics, Mars wins. So that engine is hot. Saturn is going to try and put the brakes on stuff, and Aries and Mars and Aries is going to maybe run roughshod over it. So we're going to see, unfortunately, likely an escalation when it comes to like global unrest. And in our personal lives, we might see an echo of that as well. So just take responsibility for your Aries. We all have Aries. So, like, wherever you get spicy and wherever you need a little bit of, you know, wherever you just need some help getting that heat off of you or out of you, do that. And now it is 6:06, and I don't want these to get too much longer than an hour, but this has been such a pleasure. I'm actually going to hold off talking about Uranus and Gemini. I'm going to go into more depth on the transits because I'm going to do these weekly. So I don't want to go through the whole month of April because then there's nothing to talk about next week. Just as a reminder, please DM me if you have any questions about the show, your chart, anything. The chat function works perfectly as well. But if you want me to prepare anything for you, feel free to DM me because I'm going to be back next Wednesday doing the same thing. And yeah, it's always fun to get audience questions, but honestly, the chat is so dope too. And I love the live aspect of it. So come back. It's always going to be Wednesdays, 5 p.m. PST, 8 p.m. EST. And then tell a friend. Let's grow this thing. How do we DM you? You can find me on Instagram and maybe Noor. I don't know if Noor is still here, but someone can put it's Isa Naka, ISANAKA, and then stars and stars with Isa on Instagram as well. Yeah. Thank you, Natty, my sister. I'm like, my producer, my sister, put it in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I'll see y'all next Wednesday. And then, yes, if you have a question for me, always ask. And listen to this week's episode. I'm trying to get better at plugging the show. Follow us, Stars and Stars with Isa, Pinche Naka, and listen, download. Like, all of this helps, y'all, because we're almost done with season 2 and we really want that renewal for season 3. So anything helps. Like, tell a friend, leave a comment. If you're watching this after I posted it, leave a comment. Like, I respond. I really respond. And then you can always book a reading with me at isanaka.com. I do so many readings a week and I love it. And I really believe in this, y'all. This is not a gimmick. This is really my life. So holler at your girl. Stay safe. Go on a run. Stay hydrated, all the things. And I'm out.